Deshaun Watson, we're still waiting on news of how long that suspension could possibly be regarding the Brown signal caller, but in his stead is backup quarterback Jacoby Brissett. On ESPN, Chris Canty had this to say about the Brown signal caller and how comfortable he is leading the Browns roster.
The beginning of the schedule for the Cleveland Browns, it's not exactly murderer's row. They're on the road against the Carolina Panthers, the New York Jets at home, the Pittsburgh Steelers at home, who are probably going to be breaking in a young quarterback, the Atlanta Falcons on the road. So you have to think that they have the potential to go 2-2 with the strength of that roster. And then you're looking at dates on the schedule with the Houston Texans, the New Orleans Saints, the Commanders, and the Miami Dolphins. So I just look at this as a situation where you could be talking about the Cleveland Browns finding a way to get to 8 or 9 wins, even with Jacoby Brissett as their starting quarterback for the entirety of 2022.
Wow, I think that's asking a lot of Jacoby Brissett. I think it's asking a lot of Jacoby Brissett.
Well, I don't know that offense is asking a lot of Jacoby Brissett. You have one of the best offensive lines. You have arguably one of the best 1-2 punches at the running back spot. You've got some weapons in your skill position core, and you've got a top-flight defense. I don't know that Jacoby Brissett has to go out there and be a world beater. He has to just give you competent quarterback
play. You have to have him be something that they have to respect on defense, at least.
He is that. He's a guy that you have to respect. He's going to make the right reads. He's going to throw the ball in the right place. There's no question about that. He will give you that. Does he have the arm talent to wow anybody? No. But he can throw the ball down the field with accuracy, and Jacoby Brissett can make winning plays. I'm not saying he's going to be the difference in them winning games or losing games. I just think Jacoby Brissett is going to be that steady hand with the offense and doing exactly what Kevin Stefanski wants him to do.
And I think that's the bigger point that needs to be talked about here. Again, you have Jacoby Brissett, who has led an Indianapolis Colts team. He's led them far down in the season, led them to a winning season as well. And then also he's somebody who's been around the league, understands what he's seeing. And so I don't necessarily think that the expectations need to be as high as some people are saying. He just needs to be that steadying hand. And in order to talk about that, we bring in Spencer German of 92.3 The Fan. And Spencer, I know that, we've talked about, Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett, but at the same time, it feels like the expectations for Jacoby Brissett are pretty dang high, at least especially given the fact that he's meant to be a spot starter realistically for Watson in his stead.
Yeah, Mac, and we know Mary Kay Cabot sort of floated out there at cleveland.com that the Browns signed Brissett with the intention of, well, we think he would play maybe a quarter of the season. So that's kind of, I think they kind of expected, like, yeah, we'll have him for part of the season and we think we can win some games. I don't think Chris Canty's that far off. If he did play the whole season, I think 8 wins at least is realistic. Maybe you could get to 9. Playoffs, I think, is a little bit of a stretch if we're having this conversation. But I think the bigger thing here is just basically asking, because I think we all assume at this point, I know it's all assumptions, we're all just guessing. We all, I think, we've all kind of whittled it down to this point to understand Deshaun Watson's probably playing at some point this season. So I think the bigger question is, how many wins do they need from Jacoby Brissett during the stretch that Deshaun Watson's not playing to get into the playoffs? If you want to have that conversation about how he can keep them afloat for the whole season, if the suspension is that large, I get that. But I do think like the real conversation or the real question for me that I'm more intrigued in is, how many games they need him to win for however long he's out there. Say it's 8 games, 10 games. How many of those games they need to win for then Deshaun Watson to take over and hopefully get them to the playoffs, which I think would be around maybe a little bit more. I would say a little bit more than 9 wins, which is what Chris Canty sort of projected for a whole season of Jacoby Brissett. I'd say you have to at least get to 10. Maybe you can sneak it with 9. We saw the Steelers kind of do that last year with a record with less than 10 wins. So it can be done, but obviously the AFC is pretty loaded. So that's kind of where my head's at with this conversation.
Yeah, and, Spencer, you bring up a good point there, too, with the AFC getting more and more loaded. And, to that point, I'll even say, look at last year what you had with Baker Mayfield as a quarterback, obviously dealing with the injuries, but at the same time, not necessarily that superstar, quarterback play that you come to it, that, you're expecting at least with the rest of this offense. But, you look at Jacoby Brissett. If you get competent quarterback play, last year you got 8 to 9 wins with whatever the hell you want to call that season from Baker Mayfield. And so, you insert somebody who gives you just solid quarterback play. And I think that all of a sudden you're looking at the rest of that talent on the offense really kind of carrying the rest of that.
Yeah, I think another element of this, Mac, and this is something that we've obviously talked about at 92.3 quite a bit, is just how is Kevin Stefanski going to run this offense? Because I think when you bring in Deshaun Watson, your offense is going to be different than what it was with Baker Mayfield. Same thing, it's going to be different than if you have Jacoby Brissett out there for an extended period of time. And yeah, like I trust Jacoby Brissett to sort of be that hold down the fort type guy in the absence of Deshaun Watson, however long that is, as we wait for an answer to that question. But I think for sure, like you then have to think about the next part of that conversation is what is Kevin Stefanski going? How is Kevin Stefanski going to run this offense? We've been critical of him at times in his inability to rely on the run game when maybe we think he should in certain situations. When you have a guy like Nick Chubb plus Kareem Hunt right behind him, they obviously added to that running back room during the draft with Jerome Ford. They have Dearness Johnson in that room as well. So you have such a stacked group there. It's like you got to count on those guys sometimes more than maybe he did. So that's the next part of that question is like, yeah, Jacoby Brissett, I think he can do a fine job kind of managing things, not necessarily losing you games, but maybe you lose some games because he can't take you to that next level because that's just not who he is. But how does Kevin Stefanski kind of manage those games as a head coach with him out there? And that could be the difference between, to Chris Canty's point, 8, 9, 10 wins with Jacoby Brissett versus, 5, 6.